And understand this is important in text messaging. Any response is better than silence. Okay, so let's look at a sample of some messaging that went wrong. So in this case, just general overview, and then I'll give you the specific messages. It's basically a situation where guy and girl match. Guy messages the girl, gets no response. Guy messages the girl again and gets basically a really, really kind of harsh negative response. You could argue it's a worse response than what he deserved, although I would argue it's a better response than what he deserved, because what he actually deserved was silence, right? And understand this is important in text messaging. Any response is better than silence. So be happy when you get strong negative responses. I've turned around strong negative responses before, okay? I had a girl, one that comes to mind. I had a girl when I was about, I would have been about 30, and she was like 18. And so I messaged her, and she basically, her first message was that like me being 30 and her being 18 was creepy and gross. And she like was like disgusted that I messaged her. I was able to eventually, through, some clever messaging, eventually turn it around, get a phone number, go on a date, which ended up being a date at her place. And then we ended up having sex on the first date. So I think that the "you're creepy, you're gross" message was a lot better in that case than silence would have been, for example. So no matter how negative the message, silence is the worst response. Any message is better than silence. Keep that in mind. But that said, the message he got here is pretty negative. So let's get into the exact specifics. So his first message, and we don't have, unfortunately, he didn't send the girl's profile, so I can't read into what he was picking on in the girl's profile to derive this message, but we'll just go with the messages in a vacuum. He said, "I'm sorry, but you do not look like a military girl." Okay, so that's his opener. Now, what's good about this opener? What's bad about this opener? Well, what's good about this opener is that it is specific to her, right? It's about her and her profile, so that's positive. And it is at least a little bit challenging, right? It's something where she might feel provoked to respond in some way, okay? The thing that's bad about it is that very word I just used, provoked, right? This message is phrased like an attack, right? The same concept, the same idea could be phrased a lot of different ways and a lot of better ways. So for example, instead of "I'm sorry, but you do not look like a military girl," almost sounds like "I don't trust you. I think you're lying to me." Or it sounds like you couldn't like hack it in the military. You're not tough enough or something like that, right? It's just very sort of either condescending or attacking in a lot of ways. And it's very likely to provoke a negative response. And again, provoking any emotional response is better than nothing, but you don't want to just go out of your way to make it a clearly negative response. You can say something that's vaguely challenging without being so harsh. For example, "You do not look like a military girl." You could point out what specifically about her isn't very military. Right? For example, maybe she has one picture where she's in fatigues, and another picture where she's in like a nice dress or something like that. And you'd be like, "Wow, I can't imagine a girl in that dress being in the military," or something like that. Does that make sense? So you're giving more of a specific thing, and it's more of it's still a challenge. It's still like, could you hack it? Are you that type, etc. And it still definitely provokes or motivates a response or an explanation, but it's a lot more positive seeming. Okay. And when you are teasing girls, when you are even negging girls, that sort of thing, you don't want to be so overtly negative that it feels like you tried to be negative. You want it to be like you're trying to be positive and they didn't quite win you over, or your version of politeness and positivity because of their so just something about them. It just there's a little thing that they're taking the wrong way or they're insecure about. That's much better than flat out "I tried to insult you" or "I tried to attack you." So this first message is actually quite attacking in that regard. And so yes, there are some girls that will respond to something like this, but a huge amount of girls, a huge percentage of girls are just going to be like, "Well, why would I explain myself to you? I don't know you yet. What is that? This is like an attack. I don't get it. I don't like it. I don't want to explain, etc." So you're very likely to get a lot of non-answers to that. And then the ones that you do get might even be antagonistic, and then you'll have to turn around the antagonistic ones. So you kind of have this idea of like, so here's like a Venn diagram, a circle of all the possible girls, right? And then you have this big chunk of girls that will be offended, this chunk of girls that will respond but in a negative way, and then this tiny chunk of girls that will respond in the exact way you want. And yes, the girls that respond the way you want will be qualifying themselves and it will be good, but you're eliminating such a huge fraction to get there. And with something a little more polite and cordial, even with the same sort of tone, same content or same idea behind it, you could get that same segment of girls responding well, while also increasing the number of girls that respond and also increasing the number of girls that respond, positively. So it's just badly phrased and it's very attacking. Okay, so he gets silence, right? Now, to his credit, instead of just quitting on silence, which most guys do, he actually follows up, and you should do this, right? If you get a silence, follow up one time. Typically, the way you want to follow up is either one of a couple things. Either you can continue the previous thing, whatever theme or joke or whatever, and just exaggerate it to another level, take it further, make it funnier, make it more interesting. That can work in some cases, especially if the first one wasn't super committal or super out there. Or the other thing you can do, and this is something guys overlook, you can just send a brand new opener and just pretend that first opener never happened. It's crazy. It kind of doesn't make sense in terms of flow, but it works. Just send a second opener, right? What you don't want to do, cardinal rule, do not escalate off of shit tests and do not escalate off of silence. So what does this guy do? He says, you do look pretty adventurous though, and I like that. How many countries have you traveled to? Now, this message is the type of message that would make sense in a particular context. If the interaction was going well, the girl's laughing, responding a lot, seems willing to qualify and prove herself to you, this is a great kind of hoop to put out there. Hey, you seemed adventurous. How many countries have you traveled to? She's like, oh, I traveled to this, this, and this. And now she's trying to impress you, is starting the conversation, gives you a reason to like her in order to get her number or to pursue it. So that's all really good. But this is all predicated on the idea that she likes you enough to want to respond and want to qualify herself to you because you're being demanding again. So first message, he attacked her and got silence, which is a negative response. Second message, he's being demanding of a response of her. And so legitimately, like I would say the vast majority of girls in this case, because it's cardinal sin, escalating off silence, escalating off a shit test simply doesn't work. It's just format-wise wrong. So he should expect silence. Instead, he got this. Hey, sorry, I prefer men with good etiquette who start conversations with, hi, nice to meet you, how are you doing? I'm not a cheap picture, but a fucking dentist. Don't talk to me like you're a 13-year-old boy. Okay, so now that is unnecessarily harsh, right? She doesn't need to, like, say he's immature. He doesn't need to, like, swear at him. She doesn't need to get offended and say, I'm not a picture, I'm a dentist, etc. But the fact that she's offended is why, because he's being, first of all, attacking, then demanding. So you can understand where she's coming from with being offended and all of that. I'm sure she doesn't actually want a guy who says, hi, nice to meet you, how are you doing? That's one of the most boring messages ever. But in her mind, what she's saying is, I just want a guy to be normal and not attacking, right? She actually would prefer a guy who's clever and interesting rather than a boring guy. But I think emotionally, at least in terms of comfort levels, not in terms of what would necessarily work to get a date with her, because that probably wouldn't work either. But at least in terms of comfort levels and what would make her less unhappy, not being attacked and not being demanded something of would make her less unhappy. So she's pointing out that flaw. Okay. So question is, how do you solve this? The right answer is text better in the first place. Have a better opening message that's not attacking, right? Phrase it or frame it differently. Second one, don't escalate and don't demand off of silence or a shit test. So those are the first things. But once you've gotten this message, okay, what can you do? First of all, I'll tell you flat out, it's probably a lost cause most of the time. You're not going to turn this around the vast majority, but you will sometimes, and you can go ahead with it. Now, one thing to be careful of, if the girl seems really angry, maybe just don't message her because you don't want to, again, get reported or blocked or that kind of stuff on the app. So if the girl seems really unhinged, just leave it, right? And just say, fuck it, I'm done. There are other girls in the world, etc. For a response that's only mildly negative, by all means, go ahead and try and turn it around. And I'll tell you something that's maybe controversial in the dating advice community, which is it's okay to apologize. Okay, it's okay to apologize. Now, you don't want to apologize in a way that says you're a loser or that you're lame or that you did something like wrong or evil or like stupid. But you can apologize for the fact that you didn't get like the response you're intending, or maybe you misread a situation or something like that. Okay. So you wouldn't apologize like you did something like morally universally wrong, but you might apologize for just like, misunderstanding or this, that, or the other. So you say, hey, sorry, I prefer men with good etiquette who start conversation with this boring stuff. I'm a dentist. Don't talk to me like a 13-year-old boy. So just off the top of my head, I haven't really drafted this out, but off the top of my head, something along the lines of like, hey, sorry if you were offended by my message. Notice it's not, hey, sorry, my message was offensive. It's like, hey, sorry if you were offended by my message or something like that. Or you could even say, sorry if my message offended you, maybe. That's like kind of an in-between. But you don't want to say, sorry, I wrote a bad message. Say, sorry, my message had the effect it had. Then you'd get like maybe genuine, because here's what she's telling you. In her objection, she's telling you, I don't want you to be a dick and immature. I want you to be a little more like straightforward with me. And she actually did go to the lengths of still messaging him. So she cares at least a little bit. She cares at least enough to at least put him in his place, or at least enough to engage. What you might say there is you would actually like take the frame. So she's saying, I want a guy who actually respects me. You can reframe these two messages. You don't look like a military girl, and are you adventurous? How many countries you traveled to? You can reframe that very easily as, I was just curious to get to know you. Be like, hey, I'm sorry if my message offended you. I just thought you might be intriguing, but I know very little about you. I was wondering yada 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 because I like girls who are this and this, right? Something like that actually really could work, because what are you doing? One, when you're saying I'm sorry, you're giving her the ability to drop it. You're giving her ability to drop the anger part. Number two, you're not being apologetic in the sense that you did something wrong. You're not saying you messed up. You're just kind of explaining, but you're not justifying. You're not saying like, I was lame for doing it, or I did this to impress, or I'm an okay person because of this. You're just kind of explaining where you were coming from, not explaining why you're a reasonable, okay person, explaining what your intention was. You see that difference, right? You're not explaining yourself, you're explaining your action. That's very, very important in terms of apologizing without being low value. So keep that in mind. But something along the lines of just being sincere, being to the point. And she said she wants a guy to say, hi, nice to meet you. How are you doing? You could even write that in as kind of a cheeky thing. You could say, sorry, it is nice to meet you, and I am curious how you're doing. I guess the point of my messages was that I do want to, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you can kind of like agree with her frame without falling into it. And that in this case is probably going to be a good way to go. Because again, in general, do we want to supplicate and qualify and apologize a lot? No. But in this case, number one, you deserve the bad response in this case, number one, okay? So there's a big difference between like if you've written actually good messages and gotten a bad response, then it's kind of on the girl. In this case, he wrote 2 bad messages. He can acknowledge that, right? Not he shouldn't acknowledge it that way, but he should acknowledge that the girl's not coming from a crazy place. He should also acknowledge that the fact that the girl's even messaging him shows that she cares on some level. So yeah, who knows, maybe it's kind of good. And then she's telling him her blueprint in a way, not necessarily her blueprint overall, but she's telling him her blueprint for replying to the next message. Hey, I'm looking for a guy that would write me something like this. So you don't have to write exactly that, but she told you, write me a message like this. Now, don't write her a message like that in a way that says everything you did was wrong. Write her a message like that in a way that says, okay, I'm capable of writing that message. Let's move forward. And it might work. Am I saying that absolutely would work? No, but it might. And notice, by the way, it's not the most clever message in the world. A lot of my messages, especially when I'm dealing with shit tests and stuff like that, will be very clever. In this case, though, that's not what's called for, right? He was already being kind of gamey in his first 2 messages. What he's missing right now, in my opinion, is being a little bit genuine. So there's a place for it. And understand that game is a balance. Game is a balance of value and comfort. Game is a balance of gaminess and normalness. And so listen to what the girl's saying. She's going to give you a lot of clues about what she needs next. Now, that doesn't mean do everything the girl says, right? Difference between listen to what the girl says and follow the girl's orders. These are very different ideas, but pay attention because she's giving you lots of clues of how to best interact with her for a way that's going to be mutually beneficial and fun for everyone.